Joining us now to discuss these latest efforts at gun control is Ian Haworth. He's an editor at the Daily Wire, and he's the host of the Ian Haworth Show and The Truth in 60 Seconds. Welcome back, Ian.
Thank you, as always, for having me.
So Biden is back at it again. He's calling for an assault weapons ban, a vague and mostly meaningless term used by the left. But tell me about your recent article, The Daily Wire, comparing the data on gun violence.
Yeah, so really central to the whole argument when it comes to gun control is the fact that the Democrats are taking advantage of the fact that a lot of people really don't know that much about guns, and they certainly don't know about the gun violence statistics. So if you were just to listen to the media and the Democrats, you would think that mass shootings were the biggest problem when it comes to gun violence. They're certainly a horrendous problem, but in terms of the data, they're actually incredibly rare. And even more so when we consider the weapons that are used. So only around 2.5% of gun deaths involve rifles. And yet when you hear Democrats talk about gun control, it's always about so-called assault rifles, which they couldn't even define if they wanted to. For them, it's just a semi-automatic rifle or semi-automatic weapon, which, for those who don't know, just means you pull the trigger once, one bullet comes out.
How many guns are there in America right now? I know that there's no specific numbers, but how many numbers are there right now? And does that kind of mean that that's just the reality of America? I mean, we're a country that was built, that's one of our most foundational rights. You know, it's right there in the Bill of Rights. The second one, that this is a God-given right. It's not a right that government gave us as a privilege and therefore can take away when they want it to be. So what are some of the numbers on that?
Yes, absolutely. It's actually quite a difficult number to know for sure. Some estimates are around 300 million. One Swiss group actually estimates it's more like 323 million. So that is a lot of guns by any measure. And so setting the constitutional argument aside, which I think you and I will agree is the most important argument, it's actually just a matter of pragmatism. You can't simply ban guns when the market is already flooded. Also, if you look at criminals, I believe in 2018, who used a gun during committing their crime, it was actually found that around 43% of the firearms they used were obtained illegally in some fashion, whether they were obtained on the street through purchase, found at the scene of the crime, things like that. And so there's a whole range of statistics that the Democrats simply aren't taking into account. And just given the pure number of guns that are out there, if you really want to get hold of one, unfortunately, you're likely going to be able to. And I don't think that should be a reason to stop the millions of law-abiding citizens who take advantage of their God-given right to keep and bear arms.
I know, I think that's just the most surprising thing for all conservatives, that it's hard for us to wrap our minds around when we hear these arguments from Democrats, or from the left, I guess I should say, is that criminals, I guess they're fine with breaking all sorts of laws, but just not ones that concerning guns. Like, that's just kind of the silliest thing when you think about it, really. But one question that you tackle in your articles at the Daily Wire is this idea that, as Joe Biden was saying, it's all about timing. And it seems like every time we have one of these tragedies, it seems like, you know, before even the smoke is cleared, you're already seeing a lot of activists going out and trying to use this as a time to go out and ask for gun control. I know in this most recent one in Boulder, Colorado, actually the officer who was killed responding to that supermarket shooting, the father of the slain officer says, "Don't use my son's death, don't use his tragedy to push for gun control." So you kind of tackle this issue in your own article. Is there any legislation that Democrats have put forward now that Biden wants the Congress to pass that would actually even prevent any of the tragedies that we've so far seen?
Well, that's the difficult part. It's very, very hard to know. A lot of mass shooting events take place when the person owned the gun legally, or they sidestepped existing procedures put in place to stop that from happening. And so just the idea that you can create a new law and solve the problem, it's really like paper handcuffs on a criminal. They can just ignore them. I think really you alluded to it most strongly earlier, is when you said that this is really just about acting. This is really about, unfortunately, taking advantage of tragedy, and also portraying anyone who disagrees on the matter of gun violence, on gun control rather, that they somehow support gun violence. I think that's one of the most horrendous strategies used by the left, when the vast majority, if not every single conservative in the country, abhors this kind of violence and would do everything they can legally and sort of physically as a human being to stop it from happening. And so just to see so many conservatives mischaracterized as supporting mass shootings or any form of gun violence, I think is really something despicable at the center of this strategy.
Especially when we see some reports, even from the CDC, that as many as 3 million times a year that guns are used defensively to save American lives. And one of the biggest ones that come to my mind is, I believe it was the Sutherland Springs shooting in Texas a few years back. There was a man who lived down the street. He happened to have an AR-15. So I believe when it was his daughter who came down and told him, "Dad, you know, there's something going on at the church," he brought his gun with him, was able to drive up and stop the shooter. And then, of course, he drove down the shooter, and there was a car chase that followed. But it's because he was armed equally with the shooter, so that this American citizen, I believe he was even a member of the NRA, he was able to take matters into his own hand and not be a sitting duck. Before I let you go, I just have to get your reaction to this. Here we're talking about Biden, but now we're hearing about his son, Hunter Biden. Just a few years ago in 2018, there was a gun incident in which Hunter Biden may or may not, we don't know at this point, have lied in purchasing his gun. We know he's a drug addict. That's something he's been open about. The family has been as well. But he said no when he was buying his gun. And then, of course, his girlfriend at the time, who was actually the widow of his brother, she took the gun from him after an argument, left it in the trash outside of a school. I mean, there's just so much going on here, potential felonies even. And what does it say to you that this is the family who's going to be lecturing us on gun issues?
Well, I think Hunter Biden is just perfectly indicative of the utter hypocrisy underlying Joe Biden in every single way. I mean, the fact that the media helped Joe Biden out and hid every single one of these scandals, and yet more are still coming out. I think a lot of the media is covering this up as we go because they know that it really shows that Joe Biden may be involved in a lot of these, not really conspiracy theories, but a lot of these theories that Hunter Biden took advantage of his last name. He's certainly the most successful drug addict I've ever seen. So I think there are definitely questions hanging over Joe Biden in that way, but he can rely on the media. I think if the disastrous press conference the other night says anything, is that he can get away with basically being unconscious on stage and they won't ask any difficult questions.
I think with Biden, he should watch his back, because just like with Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York, we saw what happened there. I mean, you at the Daily Wire and us here at OAN and many other conservative outlets, for the past year, we've been sounding the alarms about the nursing home scandal, the amount of people who are dying there contracting COVID-19 because of Governor Cuomo's orders, the sexual harassment that started leaking out, and the media covered for him until he was no longer useful for Democrats, and then all of a sudden it became a scandal. So I think Biden should watch out, because right now the media will cover for him on Hunter, on China, on all of this. But the moment he's no longer useful for them, when Kamala Harris maybe starts trying to get her stiletto on stage into the Oval Office, then we'll see what happens with the media. But Ian, always a pleasure having you on. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.